The face tattooed drug addict who tried to trick me into helping kidnap his ex-wife.
A few weeks ago, my boyfriend was running late to work, so instead of dropping me off at my work, he dropped me off at the metro station stop next to his work. There's a stop that's only a few minutes walk from campus, so I wasn't too worried about it. As I'm waiting for the train at the stop, a random person thanks me for my service. I'm caught off guard but realize that I had my military backpack on, complete with my last name stitched on. A man, covered in face tattoos and wearing dirty, smelly clothes, overhears and walks over to me as well. "Oh, you're in the military? My wife is too. She's the X position for the Y unit. Actually, you look really familiar. Were you at the holiday party at the racetrack?" The specifics checked out, but I definitely didn't remember a guy with face tattoos showing up to the event. I tell him that I might know her, but it's a big unit. The train comes and I walk on to take my seat. "Smith, Amanda Smith, I knew I recognized you." I turn around and it's Face Tattoo Man. He knows my whole name and decides to sit down next to me on the train. He starts asking me questions about my job and how his wife is doing. He says that she was feeling stressed out about her job and that she was worried she was going to get fired. I thought this was a little weird, considering that she had been fired over a week prior, but maybe he was trying to be polite and not embarrass her. But then he starts asking some strange questions. Where do we go for off-site training? When do we go? When's the next time that I will train her? I realized something was really wrong, so I get off at the next stop and try to get away from this guy. He gets off the train too. "Let's go together. You never answered my questions." I look for my phone to call someone to get me out of this situation, and I realize I left it in my boyfriend's car. I decide to tell him that I got off at the wrong stop and try to get on a different car than him when the next train arrives. He gets off of that car and onto mine at the next stop. He starts threatening me about giving him information about her, so I stand up and start making a scene, saying that I need help. A man intervenes and I get off at the next stop, which is actually my stop. I contact that woman, and it turns out that since the holiday party, he started doing heroin and became violent towards her. She and the kids moved out to an undisclosed location, and he tried abducting them at least once. He had become homeless, so that explains why I didn't recognize him at all. He did recognize me from the party, and he was trying to figure out when she would be around next. She had a restraining and no order contact against him, so she encouraged me to contact the police if this ever happened again. I decided to not take the train anymore and ditch my backpack altogether. Last week, I was working late and decided to walk over by the train stop to get some food. As I'm waiting to cross the crosswalk, I hear, "Amanda, good to see you." I look behind me, and Face Tattoo Guy is standing behind me. "No, no, no. Let's not meet and have dinner together as you try to figure out how to kidnap your wife." I turn and take off, sprinting down the busy road to get away. I'm definitely staying away from the whole line. Forever. Too long, didn't read. Took the train to work. My coworker's abusive, addict ex-husband recognizes me and tries to get info from me about her location, and he follows me to work. Then, several weeks later, he finds me again and I have to run into traffic to get away.
The Titty Man and me at 16.
To preface this, I'm a 35-year-old woman and I worked at 3 different answering services from ages 16 through my mid-20s. I hope this is okay here. It involved me just over 20 years ago. The Titty Man, bondsmen, and sheriff's deputies. I got my first job at an answering service when I was 16, and I loved it. We answered for about 200 businesses, and there was quite a mix. Same old every day, but different too. I was the baby of the office, and so was usually not alone, and my coworkers protected me from the usual office debauchery. Drugs, sex, booze, but somehow forgot to mention the Titty Man to me, so this came as a bit of a shock when he did what he did. I'd been working there for a few weeks and was alone on a Sunday night, answering calls here and there and being bored. The line for a visiting nurse company, home health care, hospice, and rehab lights up. I answer, to be greeted with a collect call from the local county jail. I accept the call, thinking that someone might have an elderly parent they can't reach and need a well check or to schedule extra visits because they got locked up. Nope. I'm greeted with, "How big's your tits?" I promptly hung up. He called back several times, and I have to accept the call in case it really is for the reasons listed above. I contact the on-call nurse, and she tells me what I just told you about, and how he does this from time to time. I then proceed to be harassed for about a half an hour when I get a brilliant idea. Of course, Titty Man calls back, and I accept the call. I tell him that I have to put him on hold sometimes so I can answer the phone, but I'll talk to him. He likes this. He starts asking questions, dirty ones, and I answer a few. Then I put him on hold, grab the other headset, and do it. Here's where law enforcement comes into play. I called the bondsman we also answered for and explained my situation. He grabbed his other phone and called his buddy inside the jail, relaying the situation. He's having trouble doing this because he's also listening to me talk dirty to this creep. I was very creative for the Titty Man, and he ate it up. My bondsman was laughing so hard he was in tears. Since Titty Man was calling from inside the overcrowded jail, they couldn't pinpoint him by just being on a phone. Deputies began shutting down banks of phones one at a time. When the call cut off mid-pervy spew, the officers checked who was on that bank. Lo and behold, there was Titty Man. He was in jail because he was, surprise, making obscene and harassing phone calls. Who'da thunk it? Deputies took him into custody with new charges, and he got another 18 months or so tacked onto his existing sentence. The idiot was fairly short to the door, too, meaning he was close to release without supervision. My story doesn't end here, however. Several years later, I was working at another answering service, and he calls. Same company and everything. My old service had closed. I informed the on-call nurse, same as before, too, and they end up pressing charges on him again. I encountered this creep and his creepy yet hilarious antics at all 3 services for the same company and different ones as well. It's been 20 years since I first encountered the Titty Man, and no longer doing answering service work, but I have a few friends that still do, and the creep is still at it. I hope you got a kick out of my story, Edit. I forgot to mention that he did this on a recorded line, and I told him I was 16 during the conversation. I wonder what the judge thought about that.
Tramp almost kidnapped me.
I grew up in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, United Kingdom. I was 12 years old, and let's just say I didn't have the easiest of upbringings. I was smoking, drinking, and staying out late around this time of my life. So I was bunking off school. My mom was at work, and it was late morning time, around 11 a.m. I wanted to buy some cigarettes, but as I was well under the legal age was 16 at the time, I had to hang around outside the shop and ask strangers if they would take my money and purchase them for me. About 1.5 miles from my house, there was a little shop called the Spar. It was on a fairly busy road. A row of hedges lined one side, with a gap that led into the field beyond, and houses on the opposite side. So I was standing maybe 10 paces from the shop, waiting for people to walk past so I could ask them to purchase my cigarettes. I usually second-guessed if they would be willing by how they looked. I asked a lady, maybe mid-40s, shoulder-length blonde hair, black business trousers, pink elbow-length jumper, looked like she smoked. She said no. I asked a guy, maybe mid-50s, shaved brown hair. He was wearing blue jeans and a white shirt. He ignored me. So I was getting desperate by this point and decided upon asking anybody that came by. Then I see a rather disheveled-looking man coming up the road towards me, past the row of hedges. He was wearing dirty dark brown suit trousers and a buttoned-up dark brown, but not the same shade of brown, dirty velvet jacket. He had a black bowler kind of hat on, and he kind of limped a little as he walked. As he got closer to me and I was trying to suss out if he looked like the type that would possibly purchase a 12-year-old cigarettes, I noticed that he was probably homeless and possibly in his late 50s, early 60s. But I thought, he probably smokes. I'll ask him. As he approached me, I gave him the usual line. "Excuse me, mate, would you please go into that shop and get some fags for me?" He stopped and thought for a second, then said, "How old are you?" I lied. "I'm 15, almost 16. Then he said, "All right, which ones do you want?" and held out a really dirty hand. I gave him my money and asked him to get me 10 sovereign. I had the exact change. He goes into the shop, and I'm waiting outside excited. I'm finally getting my cigarettes and can go home and chill out before I have to leave the house again to make it look like I've just got home from school. He comes out and gives me 20 sovereign. I am miffed to say the least and say, "But I only gave you enough money for 10. And I start panicking because I don't have any extra money to give him. At this point, he hooks my arm in his, very tightly holding my arm firmly to his side, and starts to walk back towards the hedge-lined road. All the while, he's telling me how I can make up for not having the extra money for the cigarettes. I'm kind of stunned at this point, and my mind is blank. I guess I was in some kind of shock. He leads me through the gap in the hedges and into the field, all the while talking non-stop, still briskly walking with my arm locked in his. He's telling me how I can come to his house and help him fix the roof tiles. I'm still in silent shock. The field is huge, and I can see it leads into more fields and more fields. I can hear the cars behind me getting more distant. I can't see any houses for miles. There's just fields. He's still talking, but I'm not taking in what he is saying. My mind starts to race. I finally realize that something about this isn't quite right and I have to get away. As he is still walking, still holding my arm, I suddenly and violently pull back with my arm straight. It slides my arm out of his very quickly and he goes flying forwards and lands in a heap on the floor, and I take one big step backwards. I'm terrified at this point, but still in shock. I can't speak. He's laying on the ground, groaning, holding his leg like he is in a lot of pain. "Why'd you do that for? You really hurt me. Help me up, help me up." He's holding his leg and holding his hand out for me to help him up. I'm frozen, but my mind is racing so fast. I'm looking at this disheveled man right in the eye, laying on the ground, groaning like he is in pain. But something about this situation didn't sit right with me. My gut was telling me to run. Don't help him up. "I brought you those cigarettes, didn't I? I helped you out. Why'd you do this? You've hurt me. Help me up." I take another step backwards, all the while looking into his green eyes. All of a sudden, he stops groaning and asking for me to help him up. He points his finger at me, looking me right in the eye, and says, "You're a smart girl." It was like an electric shock ran through my body, and I turn and run. I don't look back, I just run as fast as I can. When I've gotten off the hedge-lined road and turned into the next road, I slow as I'm out of breath. I start bawling my eyes out and shaking uncontrollably. I keep checking behind me, catch my breath, and don't stop running until I get home. Least to say, I was terrified I'd bump into that man again, and I never tried to buy cigarettes from that shop ever again.
Listed under not good ideas, taking the dark, creepy shortcut.
When I used to tell this story to my shitty friends, they acted as though it wasn't a big deal and I was exaggerating to get attention, so I stopped talking about it. But now as an adult who has lurked this sub for quite some time, I've realized I'm not alone. It's okay to talk about it if it makes me feel better or gives me closure, regardless of anyone who tells me to stop whining. So here it goes. In the spring of 2006, I was 18 and apparently wildly naive. I lived in a fairly populated city where very few major crimes happened. Most of the time when someone was murdered or missing, it always turned out to be in relation to the people they knew or a drug deal gone bad. Very typical crime, nothing that could be classified as scary or induce parents to keep their children indoors. My boyfriend at the time worked at the gas station/convenience store, about a 20-minute walk away from where I lived at my parents' house. His shifts were from 3 in the afternoon until midnight, and he worked alone. Everyone who's ever worked in a place like that knows that some nights of the week are just slow, no matter how many people live in the area. On nights like that, when he knew the boss man wouldn't be back that evening, he would shoot me a text asking if I was interested in coming down to hang out or study or do whatever it is that I forget I was doing at that age. Since I was completely convinced nothing was going to happen to me, idiot, I would walk down by myself and then head home around 11 when he had to start actually working to close the store. One fateful night, I was walking up from hanging out when a car pulled up to me and someone rolled down their window. Naturally, I stopped walking and leaned down to look in their car and ask them what they needed. Before you call me dumb, You should understand that in the area I lived, this isn't unusual behavior, because 9 times out of 10, it's someone asking directions, and the 1 time out of 10, it's because they thought you were someone they knew. So imagine my shock when I look in the car and the first thing I see is a fucking gun sitting on this guy's passenger seat, sort of half hidden under a coat or sweater. I'd never seen a handgun before. I start to sweat. The second thing I took in was that this guy had to be at least 40 and had a very creepy air about him. In my surprise, I hadn't noticed that he was asking me a question, so I sort of stumbled around my words and said something along the lines of, what? He responded with, "A fine thing like you shouldn't be walking around by yourself, baby. You get in the car, I'll give you a ride." This was said more like a statement than a request. I was still a good 10 minutes from my house, but there was no way I was getting in the car with this guy. I didn't want to piss him off, so in my panicked state, I put on a sort of choked, cheerful voice and told him that it was cool because I only lived right there, and pointed to a house about 10 meters away. He said something like, "That sucks, but I should give him my number so he can call me later." Again, not wanting to piss him off, I quickly gave him my boyfriend's number, thinking I was a genius because he'd drive home, call that number, and get told off by my boyfriend, and by the time he figured anything out, I'd be long gone home. He pulls away and I think I'm in the clear until I see that he drives off in the direction that I need to walk home in. Fuck. Not wanting to risk him seeing me, but wanting to get home ASAP, I make the quick choice to take the creepy dark shortcut behind the high school. Big mistake. He must have seen me dart up the hill before he had driven too far, because by the time I got up there and around the back of the school, I could see his car pulling up too fast for me to get out of sight. Like an idiot, I freeze when his car gets real close to me. He gets out and starts yelling like a crazy person, calling me a lying cunt and asking me why all the pretty girls lie to nice guys like him. How he just wanted to give me a ride and I had to be a bitch about it, and bitch little girls need to be taught some manners. The whole time he was saying this, he was taking off his belt. There was a whole slew of other things he was yelling, but I was trying to block him out and weigh my options. Option 1, turn around and run into the pitch black field that I knew pretty well, down a giant ditch, up the other side that goes right into a very nice neighborhood full of people letting out their little dogs to pee at that time of night, screaming my head off and hoping someone hears me. Option 2, run right by him down to the street full of cars and people, but risk him grabbing me on the way by, or if he had his gun on his person, being a crazy fucker and shooting at me. Option 3, pee myself out of fear right there and hope he thinks I'm gross and crazy and goes away. Option 3 was a really heavy contender for a moment. I can't actually say with full certainty that I chose option 1. I think it just happened on instinct or adrenaline or something. But while he was in the middle of telling me how I needed to be taught a lesson with his dick, I turned around and ran faster than I ever thought I could into the pitch black. I didn't even realize he was chasing after me until I jumped down into the ditch. As I was climbing up the other side, I heard him come falling straight down past me. He must not have seen that there was a drop-off coming, because from the sounds he was making, he was feeling the pain of an unexpected 7-foot drop. Because my luck had been so awesome up to this point, I was only a little surprised when I couldn't climb anymore, because my sweater was caught on a bush or a branch that I couldn't make out very well in the dark. While I was frantically trying to get unstuck, I felt his hand close in around my ankle and try to pull me down. There was no room in front of me to try to pull my leg up out of his grasp, and after a struggle, I got the only actual good idea I'd had all night. I pulled myself up as hard as I could and suddenly let go so that when he pulled me down, Not only did I get released from being caught in the bush, I toppled him over, landing really hard on top of him. He had let me go in the process, so I sprung back up and climbed up and out of the ditch and ran to the nearest house. To my great surprise, the woman who answered the door screamed when she opened it. I hadn't noticed on the short run from the ditch to the house, but my shirt was covered in blood. I didn't understand at first because from what I could tell, I only had some scrapes and bruises. I eventually learned that when I landed on top of this guy, I broke his nose in such a way that it fucking exploded blood everywhere. The police were called and he was arrested at the ER later that night while being treated for a broken nose and a fractured wrist. He was eventually, and by eventually I mean after 2 years of who knows what, only sentenced to 3 years for assault and carrying a concealed weapon without a license, but was given 2 years of time served because he had no priors. He was a fucking teacher. He had a son my age. My parents wanted to push for attempted rape, but my cousin, who was a paralegal, gave us a whole bunch of reasons about why it probably wouldn't go through, and that since it would be a charge we would lay separate from the other charges, and the legal fees didn't seem worth it. At the time, I didn't really understand how the system worked, and I just wanted the whole thing to be over. The worst thing was that I was only just 18, and if it had happened a month before, he would have been given so much more time for assaulting a minor. It's been 10 years and I still get nervous when a car drives by me a little too slowly or when someone grabs me from behind. Although now I'm way quicker to just tell someone no. I always carry a can of pepper spray and have taken a few classes on basic self-defense. And when a friend offers to walk me home at night, I always say yes. So, guy that tried to maybe murder and probably rape me, let's not meet. I like my clothes way too much to get them covered in your blood again.